Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming the program author Fish Nealman, and he is the author of Esteban, Love's Irony. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder, the selected interviews are available at our website, as well as on major platforms like Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and many more. Fish, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
I'm an author. In most of my career, I've written works of nonfiction, and I've just written my first work of fiction that turned out to be a trilogy. The first book became available towards the end of 2023. Books 2 and 3 will come out during 2024. And then I'll also have a new book following the trilogy come out towards the end of 2024.
So tell us about this book.
Esteban, the trilogy, it's a multi-generational story that begins with the birth of Esteban's father, and it ends up with the protagonist Esteban when he enters into retirement. So the story arc itself takes place over an 80-plus year period. But for the reader, while they're reading the story, everything appears to be happening today. So while time moves for the characters, it's not moving to the reader. So whatever page you're reading, it's happening today. One of the core aspects is an unrevealed secret. It's a secret that's not revealed to any of the characters in the book, whether the protagonist Esteban or any of the other characters around him. So the secret remains only the privy of the reader themselves. So they get to understand the story from their perspective about having insight that none of the characters do, but then they can also understand the story from Esteban as well as the other characters in the story. The secret that is revealed to the reader is that Esteban himself is a schizophrenic. He suffers a mental condition, and through his entire life, it's something that is never diagnosed. It's never known to Esteban that he is schizophrenic, and it's never known to anybody around or that interacts with Esteban that he is schizophrenic. The only person that knows is the reader. And the reason why nobody who interacts with Esteban is aware of his schizophrenia is because of his chosen vocation, which was as a priest. And so some of his uncharacteristic behaviors are simply put down to his humility and his piety. And he spends his whole life suffering with this mental condition and goes on to achieve incredible things. And nobody is any the wiser other than reader to his schizophrenia.
Now, who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience here?
I think that people who'd be interested in this book will fall into two aspects. One will be those that enjoy humorous books. And the other part will be people that enjoy a certain edginess to the stories that they read. Because of the themes within the book, I don't believe anybody under 18 should be reading the book. And while the book is not too graphic or too violent in any particular way, it does have particular edginess in some of the topics that it delves into. One of the topics being an affair between a priest, Esteban, and a nun. Another topic is the way an illness that the Pope has in the story that some people might find a little disturbing. It also, within the protagonist's life, he ends up going to Macau, an island off of China, and goes to the casinos there to gamble, although he doesn't realize he's gambling, going there to gamble at the time. But a number of these topics cause a certain degree of edginess within the story. And so it will appeal to people that prefer to read stories that cause certain contemplation and give pause while they're reading a story.
So could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you would say runs throughout your book?
It's the ability for somebody to leave a mark or a legacy in the world. And it doesn't require you to be the smartest or the greatest person to do that. So I'd say the central message is that you don't have to be the best at something to leave something positive behind. And even if you have ailments, and certainly Esteban with his schizophrenia has a significant ailment, it means that you can still go on to lead a valuable, meaningful life and find happiness and contribute good to this world. You know, we all have things that are thrown at us. Some are easier to deal with than others, but despite our troubles, if we are good at heart, it's probably good enough. And so this aspect of contributing and leaving behind a legacy, even if you're not the best at something, is one of the central messages.
So if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in your book that's really going to add value to the reader's life?
I think it's actually a mixture of love, hope, and resilience. Esteban struggles with finding love and dealing with loneliness. And actually, when Esteban was a youth, one lesson he learned from his father was the value of not taking sides. Esteban's father, his name was Stephen, and Stephen tells Esteban, when you pick a side, one person is going to love you and the other will hate you. You'll be much better off if both sides dislike you a little for not siding. You'll even find that everyone will end up loving you for not taking a side. As a piece of foreshadowing, Stephen then goes on to explain about how picking a side gives you less to remember and that people might even begin to think that you're smart. And Stephen tells him, no man was ever thought a fool for not speaking his mind. And that advice Esteban received from his father formed the basis of the resilience that Esteban develops when engaging with others on troubling matters or matters where he has no real advice to offer.
Now, if you were asked to compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
That's an interesting thought. I certainly haven't read the majority of books that have ever been published, but from the outset, I was trying to avoid recreating something that I'd already read. And that makes me think about that the comparison is an interesting thought. So now that I've given myself a moment to think about it, I'd probably go with Voltaire's Candide. Certainly not a new book by any stretch of the imagination, but I think both Candide and Esteban share a certain simplicity of spirit, and both are subject to degrees of happenstance within their stories. Both are written with a degree of humor. Overall, I would say that Voltaire's work is a little bit more biting than mine, especially at least in the English translation I read. I would also say that both books share a degree of irony in how they illuminate the human condition or human nature. And while Candide delves into the absurdity of life's challenges and the intrinsically flawed nature of people, that certainly does parallel some of Esteban's world as well. In Esteban, much of the focus is on the human condition and how people tend to go for a tit for tat, a quid pro quo, if you like. And even Esteban's mother, when she's giving him a guilt trip for entering into the priesthood, tells him, that's a great blessing. I would surely go to heaven. You want your mama to go to heaven, don't you?
Now, all of your subtitles contain the word love in the trilogy, Love's Ordeal, Love's Irony, Love's Triumph. Does that mean that this book is a love story?
Esteban is a multidimensional story. While not a love story as such, the common theme of love provides a strong thread that weaves throughout the story. So in many respects, Esteban can be taken as a love story. In the first book, Love's Ordeal, love is associated with a failed intimate encounter, Esteban's first time being with a girl, and that sets his trajectory to enter the priesthood. Also in book one, Esteban struggles to receive the love from his father, another ordeal, if you like, and at the end of the book, Esteban receives a lesson in tough love. In book two, Love's Irony, Esteban finds true love, but it turns out to be with somebody he shouldn't have a relationship with. When we pick up the story in book two, Esteban is now a fully fledged priest. And so he's taken a vow of celibacy, and his love interest turns out to be a nun. And obviously she's taken a vow of chastity. And so hence the irony in Love's Irony is that Esteban can't have and keep the love that he's found. And then in book three, Love's Triumph, everything comes together for Esteban and he's able to receive the love he spent his whole life wanting. And he finds contentment that he's also desired.
So tell us about some of the characters in the book.
There are quite a few characters in the book. A lot of them don't get named, so you don't have to remember directly who they were or where they were occurring in the story. But some of the main named characters in Esteban is Esteban himself, his parents. His mother is very doting and caring and spends a lot of attention on Esteban and trying to guide him. His father absolutely hates and detests Esteban. And so there's a lot of friction between his parents that ends up shaping Esteban. Some of the characters that Esteban is introduced to, a business person that his father deals with, Senor Romeo, ends up influencing and seeding a lot of thoughts with Esteban and gives him a treasure trove, a chest of books that provides a basis for a lot of the knowledge that Esteban also has. Asia, who is Esteban's love interest, she's a nun and also a head nurse at a hospital in southwest India. And then with Esteban's schizophrenia, he actually hallucinates. And the primary person that Esteban hallucinates is Jesus. And so Jesus also has a prominent role within the story as well.
So what draws you to discuss topics on the human condition?
In the past, I've worked a lot with computers and logic. In general, then, things that need consistency. Physics has to behave in a predictable way. And that means, from a computer standpoint, that we can rely on computers to carry out complex tasks in a consistent way. Even logic, fuzzy logic and aspects of chaos theory can even operate and in ways that can be rationalized. But when it comes to people, it just seems to me that all bets are off. In the natural sciences, work is explainable, but the science of civics, meaning people, there are things that people can do that are completely irrational, and people are apt to do things on a whim and apt to do something strange or unusual for no particular reason at all. And other than observing that somebody is doing something out of character or rash, it can be very difficult to explain why they're acting in the way they're acting. It's knowing that people are capable of putting themselves first or capable of not thinking about consequences of their actions that fascinates me. In this age of artificial intelligence, many organizations worry on the surface about trust and bias when using this type of technology. And yet as a species, we lack any global consistency as to what it means to establish trust or to be unbiased. Human behavior is quite simply all over the place and capable of anything at any time.
Now, you originally wrote Esteban with micro chapters. What are micro chapters and why did you do that?
When I started writing the story, I didn't have a complete arc of Esteban. I hadn't fully fleshed it out. So, for example, I didn't really know how the story was going to end. I wrote the original story as a series of vignettes where each vignette was between 1 and 4 pages long. Most of them were about 2 pages. And I called these vignettes micro chapters. And as the story began to take shape, I was able to take these micro chapters and resequence them as building blocks. And I could also shift the sequence and weave in new micro chapters between vignettes without disturbing the arc I was creating. So, for example, later in Asia's career, I had her become a doctor and develop a new groundbreaking medical technique. So I was able to go back earlier in Esteban's story and weave in a character that would allow Esteban and Asia to re-intersect their lives later on. So by using these micro chapters, it meant I avoided a lot of rewriting elements in my story as I started to build out my arc.
So can we expect any more books?
Later this year, I'll publish a work called The Flat Tire. It's written as a sidequel to Esteban, meaning it's not a prequel or it's not a sequel, but it's a story that happens alongside Esteban. In The Flat Tire, I take one of the characters from Esteban, Cardinal Otto La Macchia, and I wrote a story that involved him as a link to the Esteban story. In the Esteban story, Otto, in fact, interacts with Esteban and asks him a question that Otto wants to ask to the Pope. And in The Flat Tire, I created a situation where Otto is presented with that question himself. And so you can then see how he came about asking that question to Esteban in the Esteban story, so that The Flat Tire is a parallel event that is happening alongside Esteban with different characters, except for this Lynch character of Otto La Macchia.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
I think that comes down to 2 aspects for what people may be interested in. People that are interested in a story with a strong line of humor, and also people that like a certain edginess to their story. Because of some of the subject matter, I don't think the story should be read by people under 18 years of age. The situations within Esteban, they don't go too far in one direction or the other, so it's not too graphic or too violent. But there is an edginess to the story itself, and certainly one that can give pause for further contemplation. I think it will appeal to people who like reading a story that will stay with them long after they finish reading it, and who also like a story with a little less Armageddon about it. And so ultimately people that enjoy a story that has a happy and satisfying ending.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's tales.fish. That's TALES.fish, FISH. And so read the other way around, it's Fish Tales. And so my email then is fish@tales.fish. So it's really just a play on a fish tale as a story, an exaggerated story that is my website.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Fish Nealman, and he is the author of Esteban. Fish, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Go out there, buy the book today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work. The Author Show can be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com, and whether you're an author who would like to be featured or a reader in search of new books to read, The Author Show is a great place to start. Check us daily as we continue to introduce wonderful authors of very interesting books on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.